Didn't mean to startle anybody, but welcome to this regular meeting of the Helotes City Council. It is April 9th, 2015, and we are underway at 7 p.m. Before we get started, I would like to ask if any of you have a cell phone or other electronic communication device to please turn it to off, silent, or vibrate. And getting on with the agenda, we're going to start off tonight with the invocation, and tonight that will be handled by Council Member Fredericks, and then we will do the pledge to the American and Texas flag. So if you'll please stand for the invocation and pledges.
God of all creation, we come before you today to give you honor and praise. You are the source of all that is good. You are the source of all of our blessings. Thank you for every gift that we have been given. We ask for your grace upon all of our citizens, and especially those who work for us. We ask that you guide our minds and hearts as we work for the good of all. Please guide and direct our meeting so that it is full of wisdom, productivity, and respect for one another. Thank you for helping us to accomplish our work and our goals this day. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay, next up we have a proclamation for community wildfire protection plan that our fire department is getting into. So Chief, if you would come up front, we'll read this. Community Wildfire Protection Plan is something new, fairly new. The fire department's been working with it for a while. And the reason we're doing this proclamation is it's part of the requirement for the fire department to be able to proceed with the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and enable us to apply for and receive, hopefully, some grant money. And so that's what this proclamation's for. And I will read this. It says, from the Office of the Mayor, Helotes, Texas, proclamation, Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Whereas Texas is experiencing unprecedented growth and development in areas that were once rural, coupled with an increase in the occurrence of wildfires, and whereas it is in these areas where development meets vegetation or the wildland-urban interface that the greatest risk of public safety and property from wildfire exists, and whereas the first defense for wildfire protection is preparedness and public education concerning the dangers that wildfire poses to the residents and the natural resources of the city of Helotes, and whereas a community wildfire protection plan, also known as a CWPP, is authorized under the provisions outlined in Title I of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003, and whereas the CWPP is a document developed collaboratively between local government, state governments, and other stakeholders in consultation with federal agencies that identifies how a community will reduce risk by addressing structural ignitability, prioritizing hazardous fuel reduction efforts on public and private lands, and recommending measures for homeowners and communities to reduce ignitability. And whereas communities with a CWPP receive priority when state and federal funding is allocated for mitigation, and a CWPP is the most effective way to keep our communities safe from wildfire, and whereas the Helotes City Council urges all residents of this city and this community to participate in the implementation of a community wildfire protection plan in accordance with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. Now therefore, I, Thomas A. Schoolcraft, on behalf of the members of City Council, and by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Helotes, Texas, do hereby set my hand and cause this seal to be affixed. Wow. And we edited that down to make it shorter. Got it? Thanks. You want to say anything?
Just real quick. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for this proclamation. We have been working on a community wildfire protection plan for the last few months. As the mayor said, this is one of the requirements for that. We have significant stakeholders and partners in this program, including the Texas A&M Forest Service, numerous assets from them, the Texas Parks and Wildlife, which is a very important partner with us with our buffer up to the state natural area, Government Canyons natural area. Bexar County Fire Marshal's Office, their person is assigned to their wildfire protection plan. San Antonio Fire Department, the captain in charge of the wildfire response with San Antonio Fire Department, and numerous other people. We've talked with our city arborist, city administrator, public works. We'll all be partnered together on this. Unfortunately, Helotes is very susceptible to a major wildfire where we've worked into what we call the urban interface areas, where we developed into the wildlands and so forth, and the topography in Helotes, the hill country and so forth, significantly increases the effects of wildfire. So our intent with this program is to produce results that significantly increase the, first of all, prevent but minimize the effects of wildfire. So, Mayor, thank you very much for this proclamation. Thank you, City Council.
Thanks again. Yeah. Also, just wanted to let you know that the fire department has already been working with some homeowners associations as well as private individuals about their land, and this will not require any ordinances by the city at any time. It is all voluntary, and so it sounds like a good thing. And like you say, we are very susceptible, if we're not careful, to some pretty big fires. So again, thanks a lot. Okay, next up we have a public hearing. In this public hearing, we will begin it at 7:08, and this is to give all interested persons the right to appear and be heard on a request by First Choice Emergency Room to vacate and replat an approximate 3.588 acre tract of real property located generally at the intersection of Cedar Trail and State Highway 16, Bandera Road. Real property more particularly described as CB 4478B, Block 19, Lot 1A, Helotes Crossing Commercial Subdivision. Did we have anyone sign up to speak? Okay. Well, that being read, we will close this public hearing at 7:09. That takes us to the next item, is our open session or citizens to be heard. Do we have anyone sign up? No citizens signed up to speak to the council on any matter, so we will go past that and move right into the consent agenda. And just for informational purposes, a consent agenda in our type of meeting is generally a grouping of multiple items that staff as well as I consider fairly routine, and the intent is for them to be all handled as a group with one motion and a second and a vote accordingly. However, if a council member has a question on any one of the items that can be answered fairly briefly, we'll address the question. If they require a discussion, they can request to have that item pulled. I would like to let council know that on items 7 and 8, last night Planning and Zoning Commission did approve both of those items. So that's why they're here tonight for your consideration. So I'll ask, does any council member have a question or a request to pull any of the items? No? Okay, then we'll move right to the question, and tonight's consent agenda is items 5 through 9. So if I can have a motion and a second to approve those items as consent agenda items, we will have that now.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve consent agenda items 5 through 9 as written.
We have a motion from Buys, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
A second from Blue. So with a motion from Buys and a second with Blue to approve consent agenda items 5 through 9, we'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Consent agenda items 5 through 9 pass unanimously. That takes us to item number 10, an individual item. And this particular item is discussion on action on an ordinance providing for the extension of Helotes city limits by annexation of the tract of land that's described herein and has been discussed in public hearings in the past. So I would entertain a motion and a second to discuss and take action on item 10.
Mayor, I make a motion that we discuss and take action on item 10 as written.
We have a motion from Fredericks. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second from Villanueva. And I would like to point out that we did amend the municipal service plan for each of these items and under fire protection, and it's highlighted. So just make a note of that amendment. Otherwise, we're open for discussion. Paul, any discussion from you?
No, sir.
No? Ed?
No, sir.
Alex? Bert? Any discussion? No discussion, we'll call the question. All in favor of approving item 10, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Item 10 is approved. Takes us to number 11. Again, this is a discussion and action on the next tract that we have had on our previous agendas. So again, a motion and a second, please.
Mayor, I make a motion we discuss and take action on agenda item number 11.
We have a motion from Buys. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Fredericks. Any discussion? Paul? Ed?
No, sir.
Alex? Then we'll call the question. All in favor of approval of item 11, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. On to 12. This is another extension of the Helotes city limits by annexation and ordinance. So again, a motion and a second.
Mayor, I make a motion that we discuss and take action on item number 12 as written.
We have a motion from Fredericks. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Villanueva. Paul, anything? Ed?
No discussion.
Nothing? Bert?
No.
All in favor of item 12, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 13, this is our fourth and last tract in this particular area. And again, this is for an ordinance for the extension of our city limits by annexation. So again, I'll ask for a motion in a second.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we discuss and take action, item 12 is written.
We have a motion from Villanueva. Second?
Second.
Second from Fredericks.
Mayor,
Yes.
wasn't it supposed to be 13?
Oh, was it 13?
Oh, yeah, that's what I said.
Supposed to be 13.
Yeah, 13. What'd I say?
I thought we said 12, sir.
I said 12.
You did?
I did.
Okay.
I'm gonna go back to that item.
No, we're done with 12. So this is 13. This is the fourth and last track. So again, to make sure we're clear, we are addressing item 13. And this is the fourth and last tract of this particular annexation process. So again, we have a motion from Villanueva, a second from Fredericks, and we had no questions or requests for discussion. So we'll call the question. All in favor of approving item 13, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion is Unanimous. The approval is positive for item 13. That takes us to 14, which is a discussion and action on the stormwater management plan for this particular subdivision, and it is Brycewood subdivision off of Gom Road. So, again, we have a motion and a second to discuss and take action on this. Item 14.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we discuss, take action on item 14. Is that the right number?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a motion from, see what you started?
Yeah. Domino effect.
We have a motion from Buys for item 14. I have a second.
I'll second that.
Second from Villanueva. And again, this is discussion and action on the stormwater management plan for Brycewood subdivision. So, Bert, you're first up. Any discussion on this item?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is that our city engineer approved the stormwater management plan for this, for the Brycewood subdivision, and I agree with him.
Okay, is that it?
That's all I had.
Ed,
No discussion.
no discussion? Alex? Paul? Okay, no further discussion being requested. We will call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Item 14 is approved as written. That takes us to item 15. This is a discussion only and hopefully direction from council on amendments to the city council policies and procedures. And we've made quite a few changes. They're in your notebook. Hopefully you've had a chance to go over them. So I don't know, do y'all need a presentation by the city administrator? Or do you want to just go ahead and go into discussion? And he'll be available for questions, and so will I. Okay? Paul, why don't you start off?
I guess the only thing that kind of stuck out, at least initially, was under city council, I guess it's the last item that we struck out, the final authority on hiring and firing. I guess that was addressed in, I guess, a personnel,
What page?
the personnel guide for the city.
Yes, termination of employees. is
So
addressed.
I think we discussed that a while back. There's an appeal process now for an employee.
There is an
Well, there
appeal,
always has been.
yeah, there is an appeals process, and during the personnel policies and procedures manual discussion, it was stated by council that they did not want appeals of that nature to come all the way up to council, but end with the mayor.
And this still gives council the ability to hire and fire, the responsibility of the police chief, fire chief, city administrator, city secretary. Okay?
I was trying to clarify. I couldn't remember if that was
Yeah.
the process and the personnel manual.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Ed, anything from you?
No, I like the changes. Thank you.
Okay. Alex?
I read through them. Predominantly, they seem to be cleaning up with the language that was in there already. I
Pretty
mean,
much.
adding
Getting rid of things that
lots of
really didn't apply.
capitalization, punctuation, rearranging of paragraphs, but pretty much essentially the same thing that we had before, so I have no further discussion at all.
Okay. Bert?
I have a few questions, hopefully this will be short. On page 3, the first paragraph, this is a matter of just grammar. The last sentence reads, if both the mayor and mayor pro tem are absent, any council member may be appointed to preside at, I think, isn't these, it's been struck, shouldn't it still be there? At the council meeting?
Yes,
Okay, all right. Next, let's see,
Mr. Mayor, on that point, the appointment would be done by the mayor?
Which one was this?
If-
it's
in
page,
that one statement,
page 3.
Which was the statement again? What line? This last sentence right there. Okay.
So if the mayor and the mayor pro tem are not able to be present, then any council member may be appointed, but the question was by whom? Presumably by the mayor to replace them?
Yeah, if there's advance notice, I would assume the mayor or the mayor pro tem, whichever is gonna be presiding. But the impression that I got from reading the rules on this is that the quorum would just decide which one there is gonna preside, if no appointment has been made previous to the meeting, and that's the language. That make sense?
So whoever's there, just,
You just decide among you who's gonna preside.
Okay.
And whether you decide whether it's the senior member or the one that's been there the longest, you
Well,
guys
Maybe,
We'll clarify
been there
that.
about the same.
We'll clarify that.
yeah,
Yeah,
maybe just make it
yeah.
the senior member or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it still me?
Yeah.
Okay. On page 4, and hopefully this doesn't happen, I know it used to, but should a city council meeting go past midnight, the presiding officer has the option to either continue the meeting until all the posted items are considered and acted upon, or he or she may adjourn the meeting and continue the same the following day. When you mean the same, or when we mean the same, does that mean starting at 7 o'clock in the evening the next day, or what?
That would mean the same meeting, continuation of the same
The
meeting
same
at,
agenda.
at a date or a time, I would assume.
Well, it would be the
established.
following day, so it would start at 7 again?
Well, whatever we would say, but typically, yeah, 7 o'clock.
Okay, do we need to put a time in there, or you think it's clear enough?
I think it's clear enough. I think it's gonna
Okay.
leave it up to the prerogative of the council.
Hopefully, we won't have to do that very often.
Yeah,
Okay,
but that's directly out of the code.
okay, and on page 10 and 11, the gifts part that has been struck, in my mind, unless it's covered under the Article 4 Ethics on Municipal Code of Ordinances, I think this should be left in. That's-
It is covered in the Code of Ethics, which is why I struck it.
That's why you struck it, because it's in, we don't need to put the verbiage in?
I just referenced that Code of Ordinances section. It's in the ethics policy.
Okay, so we are covered for the same thing that's been struck?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay,
And like Rick says, it just refers to the ethics ordinance.
okay, and then I had a question about, on page 12, former council members. I'm not really, I really don't understand this, like, it says past members of the city council who speak to current city council about a pending issue should disclose whom they are speaking on behalf of, whether it be an individual or organization. I don't understand why an ex-council person would, I mean, they would still have to be a citizen to speak, right, or a member of the ETJ?
Yes.
So why is this even in here? I mean, in my mind, they're just, I mean, once you're off council, you go back to being a citizen.
It's a good point,
Mhm.
and the reason it's in there is also it should include committee members. If a committee member comes up, they have to clarify, or they should, and they're usually asked to clarify if they're speaking on behalf of the committee that they serve on, or as an individual.
But would they,
I didn't pick up on this. Did you
would they
pick up on it?
still have to be a citizen or a member of, or a resident of the ETJ to speak?
It's
'Cause right
citizens-
here,
it's
right,
citizens to be heard, yes, but not at a public hearing.
Okay. Because right
The
here,
short
does
answer to your question, Councilman, is that it's a holdover from prior
Yeah.
policies and procedures. And so I think that if you wanted to eliminate it, there's no state law, I don't believe, that would regulate that. So you could.
I would think that once you are out of office, you go back to being a citizen, and you should be, you don't have any special privileges, in my mind.
Well, that's not the intent, but a lot of people look at former council members, like former military or whatever, is
Okay,
maybe speaking for a group, but neither Rick nor I picked up on that. But if you guys want to have that removed or changed, just let us know.
well, and I would just like to state that I think it needs to be struck. I don't think, once you're off council, you become a citizen again.
Okay,
Okay, let me see. Okay, bear with me.
that's okay.
Okay, I think I have one more thing. Pages 32 and 33, they've all been, the whole, both pages have been struck. Is this because it's covered somewhere else?
All of that is covered in the Personnel Policy and Procedures Manual, with the exception, we have an internal policy for use of city buildings, grounds, and facilities. City vehicles, weapons, and workplace violence are in the policies and procedures already. And energy saving, I just didn't see a reason for that to be in council policy.
Well, the energy saving, I understand, but this, all the rest of it is covered somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's all I had.
Yeah, and since this is policies and procedures primarily for council, that's why a lot of this extra stuff was pulled out of here
Okay.
that has to deal with employees. That's it?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that that last pages 32 and 33 were covered somewhere else.
Okay, we'll go, since he's brought up those questions, any follow-up?
No, sir.
Ed, any follow-up?
No, sir.
Alex? Okay, so Rick and Grace have made a note of those, and we will look at that and then bring it back to you guys. Okay, next up, this is something that Rick has been preparing for and waiting with anxious anticipation. This is a presentation, and what we're proposing to council is to consider allowing the city to have an election, most likely in November, to increase the city sales tax by 0.25%, and that would be designated by law or by code, as Rick will cover, strictly for street maintenance and also drainage structures under the streets. And so that would give us, and he'll show you the revenue, and he's got a special Google Earth, what would you call that?
Map.
Exercise? Exercise. I think you're all gonna get to pick a street and that kind of stuff. So Rick, take it away.
All right.
Be sure your mic's on.
We're gonna get to pick this.
Good evening. Thanks for entertaining our bringing this issue forward to y'all tonight. I'm here joined with our Public Works Department and our Animal Control Department because we believe that what we are presenting to you tonight is something that this city needs to pursue. Simply because the current revenues that we bring in and that we allocate to street maintenance and drainage maintenance, we feel over the long term are not adequate to be able to address some of the issues that we currently have now. So with that said, let me go through here. I want to take you on sort of a historical perspective of where we have come from in terms of appropriations for street and drainage maintenance. And what we mean by drainage maintenance is all the drainage maintenance that we have within the right-of-way or underneath bridges or culverts that we believe are integral to the actual street itself. Okay, looking at how much money we spend on an annual basis from 2010 to 2015, that's what this chart is showing. And this chart is moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, you'll see we do not believe that at the current level of funding, about $100 grand a year, we believe that we're doing a good job maintaining what we have, but we don't believe that we are doing an exceptional job with this amount of money correcting severe deficiencies in our complete streets system, if you will. So essentially we go from about $53,000 in 2010. This year we're up to $95,000. That's down slightly from 2014, and that's primarily because we completed most of the crack fill maintenance throughout this, well, excuse me, the edge of pavement maintenance that we have been completing throughout the city. We broke this down again by streets and drainage, so you can see, again, we're going in the right direction with the amount of funds that we're allocating to streets and to drainage. Most of the monies, as you can see, are in blue. Those are allocated to actual streets, or those are actual expenditures that we have spent on streets, and the red, of course, is drainage. Drainage for the first few years was sort of intensive in the sense that we had to locate because the city had not done an adequate job for a number of years keeping those drainage areas maintained. And so a lot of our initial efforts were, and when the mayor came on in 2007, 2008, worked quite a bit on this, locating actual drainage culverts and essentially cleaning them out because they were full of rocks and debris. And now that we have done that, the maintenance that we have now is essentially mowing, okay? Making sure that the drainage area is mowed, making sure that no rocks get into the culverts. If they do, we take care of them before it's completely sealed up. So we've gone from basically ground zero to a true maintenance program of all the different drainage areas that we have currently. in looking since 2008, so what have we accomplished? And I've put together this chart. Crack fill, we have crack filled every subdivision within the city of Helotes with the exception of Helotes Park Estates, which is a large one, and Mountain View and Orange Tower to the north of the city. Drainage structures, again, we have located all drainage structures. We are currently maintaining all drainage structures through a contract with Maldonado Landscaping. Once a month they go around and maintain all, at least once a month they go around and maintain all the drainage culverts that we have. Edge of pavement and chip seal, we have completed edge of pavement and chip seal throughout the entire city. Now, as you will see in the pictures that we will show you, there's still much work to be done, and in a lot of instances, edge of pavement and chip seal would not have been the ideal solution, okay, but for the fact that we had a limited amount of funds. So please don't take it that, hey, we've completed edge of pavement and chip seal. We don't actually need additional revenues coming in order to fix the job on a long-term basis. And seal coat, you can see seal coat here. It's meant to really represent zero. We have done zero seal coating in the city of Helotes simply because funds would not allow us to do seal coating. So looking ahead at what we're needing, the Public Works Department has done a preliminary pavement condition index, if you will, where they have completed site visits to 100% of the streets, drainage structures, and they have photographed every one of the streets and drainage structures to give you, council, a representative example of how that whole street actually looks, or give you a justification for why we're saying it needs to be crack filled, seal coated, milled and overlaid, so on and so forth. The categories that we broke those down into were crack fill, and I assume that most of y'all know what crack fill is. It's essentially if you got a crack in asphalt, you fill it with thank you, hot asphalt sort of material, and it seeks into the cracks. Crack fill, we've also categorized into crack fill and seal coat in the sense that in many areas there's a large amount of cracks, so you would initially crack fill and then you would seal coat the entire pavement to make sure that the entire street, the complete street, is sealed accordingly. Some areas don't necessarily need to be crack filled, but they need to be seal coated to maintain the pavement that is there. And in certain areas, either the cracks or the edge of road degradation or a variety of other reasons, the street needs to be milled and overlaid. Milled means you basically crunch it up. Overlay it means you overlay it with new asphalt. And pricing that we have come up here initially is based on prior bids that we have received for that type of work. And so we feel that we feel very comfortable with the numbers that we included in council packet as a representative estimate of what that work would cost in the open marketplace. This is the information that was presented in council packets, and you can see it was just recently completed, so this material is up to date. And I'm not going to go through each one of these slides, but essentially what you have is the maintenance type that that the Public Works Department is suggesting, the street name that it corresponds to, the length and width of street that would require mill and overlay or crack fill and seal, and that comes up obviously with a square footage. We then have our cost per square foot, which is based on, like I said, prior bids. And of course, this key column is how are we coming up with these numbers? You can see that that's $1.98 a square foot for anything that's within A. A D category would be 24 cents a square foot coming from, we're looking at crack fill and we're also looking at sealing, so you would basically add the 11 plus 13 cents per square foot to get your 24 cents per square foot. So that's this chart. This chart that's included in council packet includes every street within the city of Helotes, which I now understand is how many linear miles, or 41.5 linear miles of streets. We used to have, I think, 33 linear miles, but with the recent addition of Gulm, Shanefield, Braun, and some of 1560, not 1560, those three streets, it's gone up to 41 and a half linear miles. Again, you can see crack fill is a significant part of what we are including in this report. So the total dollar amount that we're looking at based on these estimates is about $1.87 million that we would need to have in our coffers or generate somehow in order to complete all of this work. The problem that we have, and the reason that we're coming to you tonight, is because it would take 27 years at our average funding level in order to complete all of this work, which we don't believe is sufficient enough, and I would hope that y'all would agree that's probably not sufficient enough, because many of our streets are going to be deteriorating significantly over the next 27 years. The average funding level, if you look at all of those prior years since 2010, if you average them together, is $69,000, $70,000. Okay, so that's where we come up with the 27 years. Okay, now the fun part. So what I would like each council member to do, and Josh will take that marker right there and he'll write down the streets that you select, is to pick 2 streets in the city of Helotes, random streets please, that you would like us to take a look at. And I will, once we go to those, I will hand the mic over to Josh Mayer, who is our Public Works Supervisor, to explain the justifications for why we are recommending the type of application we are on those streets. And hopefully, if the picture quality is good enough, you will kind of get a general idea of why we're recommending that. So we'll start with Mr. Fredericks, or Councilman Fredericks. What 2 streets would you like to look at?
Diamond K and Circle A.
Okay, Diamond K and Circle A. Mayor Schoolcraft?
Altaloma and Wagon Pass.
Okay, Altaloma and Wagon Pass. Councilman Bice?
Paragon Road and Stagecoach Lane.
Paragon and Stagecoach. And Councilman Blue?
Well, they picked a couple of them that I was gonna go on, so we better not overlap them, right?
Yes, please.
You can't pick Cedar Springs.
No, I know. Those
Yeah, no gated communities.
No gated communities.
Well, I guess one that would probably be good would be Scenic Loop, within the part that's within the city limits, because
Okay.
that's getting a lot of traffic, and then Antonio.
Scenic Loop in Antonio, and Councilman Villanueva.
I'm kinda curious about Bar-X, only because you have option 1 and option 2,
Mm-hmm.
and then, you stole mine, Antonio. Yeah, Marin Hall, so, yeah.
Okay, so the first street that we will go to, if you would step up, is Diamond K. Take it away.
So would you like me to just give you an overview, or would you like to just ask questions as we go through this?
You take it.
Go ahead and give
Okay,
me.
well, Diamond K, as you see pictured here, we're recommending a mail-in overlay. And what I got wrote is due to the chip seal failure and high amounts of cracking, as you can see, years ago, there was a large amount of cracking on the left-hand side of the road, and we came back with a chip seal option, basically chip seal on top of cracks. And typically, what happens there is the cracks continue to crack and the chip seal fails. Cracks move in and out as temperature changes and season changes. So what you're spraying on top of it then becomes loose because what's underneath it is loose, and you're not really rectifying the whole problem. And what you have here is spots where it's completely failed, spots where it's still held together, spots that have deteriorated since it was touched. So you get a real poor overall ride quality on that side of the road. We have documented complaints from residents that drive on this road every day, basically requesting that we do something about it. So that's why this is one of the streets that we recommended the most drastic maintenance to.
Are there any questions on Diamond K?
I guess the only question I have is, I know drainage has been a problem there. Is that because of the drainage? Some of the issues here are because of the drainage issues that have been
That you can answer.
Yeah, water flow is always an issue. The more water on a street is obviously gonna cause more problems. To contribute all to drainage, you know, may not be able to do that, but, if you got a crack in your street that's an inch thick, and obviously there's water standing there for 2 days because of a flood, it's not gonna help it. I do know that, there is plans to improve drainage in this area, so that will also, disturb the current road condition there, so hopefully we'll be able to get all that done kind of at the same time to repair that whole street.
Josh, if you say you're gonna do if you would like to do an overlay on this, on
Yes,
Diamond
sir.
K, are you still looking at that machine, what's it called, a zipper, or asphalt zipper?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that what you would use to do this?
Absolutely.
And would it be your department doing it?
It would just depend on the way the city would choose to move forward with that. It could be contracted, it could be done in-house. It's not a hugely complicated process, but, we wouldn't really have any decision on that right now because we obviously don't have the equipment to do it.
Let me clarify, the estimates that we included are contractor bids, so that would be complete work. That would not, none of these assume that we had an asphalt zipper to take care of this.
Okay,
And just a reminder, Asphalt Zipper has, proposed coming out and doing a demonstration on any street that we pick. And, we would still be responsible for some of the costs, but they would provide the machine and some of the other things. The zipper machine, we'd have to have the loader, so this might be a good candidate. And I will say, I think it was '08 when we did that, overspray on there, or chip seal, and that was because that whole side was alligatored. It was amazing, I've never seen alligator. So this was a good fix at the time, knowing full well it probably would have to be addressed in the next 5 to 6, 7 years. But it's held up, not bad.
Any other questions on Diamond K?
Anything else?
Let me ask a question. As far as repair or no work on a road like that, what is the lifespan of that new work or the improvement? I mean, does it last 7 years? Do we have any, like 7 to 10 years that give any life to the road without having to redo it, or?
You talking about just an overlay?
Yeah, I don't know.
Josh, you wanna address that?
If you're talking about mill and overlay, that's basically a complete reconstruction. Typically with complete reconstruction, the estimated life, the standard kind of text dot and the Corps of Engineers goes by is a minimum 25 years. And then of course, if you keep it on that 6 to 8 year recommended maintenance program, you can extend that 25 years, but that's kind of what the base number you would start with.
That's good. That's a worthwhile investment. I'm just curious.
Alex, anything?
No, that's one of the roads that was one of the I was gonna pick because,
Yeah, me too.
you go right down there behind the Dairy Queen and you get jostled pretty badly on that road. 'Cause
Yeah.
I know it's not leaking, but boy, it's a terrible road to ride on.
And what you have here is Circle Lay, which is one of our more highly traveled inlets to subdivisions that we have here. We're recommending the mill and overlay in this street also due to aggregate loss up the hill. This particular slide doesn't really show that because it's asphalt, not chip seal. You don't typically get that aggregate loss with asphalt that you get with chip seal. But it's high amounts of cracking, very poor ride quality. If you see up there on the top kind of left-hand picture, that's kind of atypical for the first block going into that street of chip seal patches on top of asphalt that we've just been repatching over the years. High amounts of cracking. If you were to actually walk that street, you would pretty much have to crack fill almost the whole street. And when you get to that amount of cracking, you start thinking about cracking's a 5-year fix. Major work is 25-year fix. When does it become cost effective to move past the crack fill? And that's kind of what we got here. So just poor ride quality, extreme cracking, and aggregate loss up the hill. There's other spots up the hill around the Flying W access point there that you have the same type of problem, so that's why we are recommending that for that street.
Any questions on Circle A? All right, Altaloma.
Altaloma's a small street. I believe there's only 5 or 6 houses down that street, but as you can see from this picture, There's patches where, utility cuts have been made through the street. We're recommending a mill and overlay just due to the poor overall quality of the street. There's really no defined edge in some of these sections here. You can see that we've been through there recently and crack filled it. I believe it was 2 to 3 years ago when we were doing that section. This is a street we identified as a potential candidate for the mill and overlay that was mentioned by Asphalt Zipper due to poor quality of the street and also low traffic volume. So we kind of picture this as our test street. We don't want to jump into a busy road the first time we're doing a mill and overlay project for the city, and it's also a poor quality road. So that's why it was recommended mill and overlay.
Okay, the next street is Wagon Pass.
Wagon Pass has recently been crack filled. I believe Wagon Pass was crack filled the 2013-2014 budget. That's up there at the top in this a small section of street. Here we recommended the seal coat option due to aggregate loss. If you look at the surface of the road there, you do see some cracking that we would have to address before we went in there. But if you see where the rock is starting to turn white, you no longer see black. What's happening is your aggregates are getting pushed down into your oil, or if it's on a corner, a lot of time it's getting pulled up from the oil because of the turn of the cars. And basically what we're trying to do is just keep all the aggregate in place that's already existing. And the way you do that is with a seal coat to kind of keep all that stuck together. This street hasn't been seal coated. I mean, since before 2007, I know that. And we kind of based it off of an L&V street report that was given to us in 2007, recommending seal coat in certain areas, and seeing as how crack fill had been done within the last 2 years. That's why we just recommended the one option.
Next street is Paragon.
I picked that one because I know somebody lives on that street, off of that street.
And the other street?
This is the upper part of Paragon towards the back. We recommended a seal coat to this street for the entire street due to the aggregate loss. And then we recommended a 1,500 square foot mill and overlay area. Basically, the 1,500 square foot's estimated square footage. We went up there and kind of measured bad patches in the area. If you look here on the map, you can see a chip sealed patch for a utility cut, and then some road failure right there where the lane of traffic would be. Real poor ride quality, so we just kind of said with the street needs seal coat for the aggregate loss, and also let's improve the ride quality since we're up here doing this.
Josh?
Bert has a question.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, thank you. The first part of Paragon is been, I guess, is that an overlay? You know,
You're
where you
talking
come
on-
in off of 1560 and it goes up so far? Is that what you would call an overlay?
You're talking about on the corner where the asphalt changes to asphalt from chip seal?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be considered an overlay. I don't know exactly if they did a complete reconstruction on it, but when you're gonna do the mill process, you don't call it a complete reconstruction. You call it a mill and overlay because you're using the same aggregate materials that's already on site. So that's why it's just called an overlay instead of,
Because that part of Paragon is very nice. Were you mayor at the time when that was done?
No, but we lived here. I don't remember what year that was done, but it was not milled, it was just an overlay.
it was just.
Which
brand
is
And
an
then when
overlay?
they did that new culvert,
Right.
I guess that was in '07. That particular part was overlaid also. So
So-
all that's new.
So it's all new construction.
Why aren't we just doing, instead of a mill and overlay, why aren't we just doing overlays? Is it that much more expensive?
Well, the problem when you just do an overlay, you get an issue called reflective cracking, and what happens is if the road's already cracked and you don't address that cracked issue, all it's gonna do is
okay.
continue to crack.
It'll crack through the new stuff.
Yes, sir. So, typically with a chip seal type road, if you have a crack start there, it's gonna always show up there. You can do things to slow it down and prevent it, like the crack fill option.
But with the mill, you're starting over.
Right, you're starting over from
From the
scratch.
bottom.
You're taking
Gotcha.
your current stuff and the old stuff and making new stuff with it. There are other options to it. They do sell other products. It's just the mill and overlay is the ultimate goal, right? That's what you want to be able to get to the position to be able to do. That way, you're not patching streets, you're giving yourself the ability to do new streets for your residents.
And just, to remind council, I believe we talked about asphalt zipper at one time. That was where we would make the investment in the machine. And, you can go to asphaltzipper.com and watch some videos, but their selling point on that is that a small public works department like we have, 3 people, can actually do, mill and overlay with, that machine. And so you can cut your cost quite a bit. We just have to look and compare numbers when we get to that point.
If I recall, the machine was between $75,000 and $100,000, and that was
Yeah, for the medium, I think that was a 6 or 8 foot wide.
yeah, and that's an attachment that sits on, that goes to our current Bobcat or skid steer that we have.
And if we went up to, I think, the 8 foot, it would take a larger loader.
Yes, sir.
I forget the designation on the loader, but we would rent the loader whenever we wanted to go out and do the millwork. But it actually grinds up the existing street and base, lays it back down, we mix concrete with it, roll it, and then put the overlay on.
Oh, it's concrete?
You mix concrete in, or cement, you mix cement in with it.
So got a question.
Yeah.
So have we kind of done a cost analysis to see if we invested in that type of machinery, put our people to work? I mean, where's the savings? I'm sure there's some.
Yeah,
And we can do that on our own timetable or
right,
their timetable.
right. I
That's
don't think we've done a cost comparison on that.
There actually is a cost comparison that is provided through Asphalt Zipper that we have received. And if you know that information you want, it wouldn't be no problem to get together,
Yeah.
so we can do that.
Okay, the next street is Stagecoach.
Stagecoach lanes, we got the seal coat, simply because it, like most of our other streets, we really never got around to doing that. We got aggregate loss throughout the whole street. If you drive it, you can just see the piles of aggregates on the sides of the road that's built up over time. We also have some estimated square foot mill and overlay. There's some real rough areas on the corner of Stagecoach and Mesquite Flat, as you can see depicted there. You also have standing water, whether it be from rain or the resident watering of their lawn, which will continue to compromise kind of your subgrade until you get that whole level of street kind of raised up above the yard there. And also you have some chip seal patches that have been through there throughout the years that have failed, and then you got failed chip seal, stuck chip seal, which really deteriorates the ride quality on that street there.
I don't water my grass. 'Cause I don't have
Questions
any.
Any questions on this one?
No, sir.
Yeah, it's important to note, I would think that many of these streets, you know, they're 30, 40, 50 years old. And so they've really, for the most part, held up pretty well. The last chip seal, major chip seal, where they came in and oiled and did rock on, any of these streets, I would say is probably early to mid-90s. Cause I know that's when they did Ranch Acres in part and some of Park Estates, so it is something we're gonna need to start looking at in the next few years.
Here's what we've got, Scenic Loop Drive. We're recommending chips on the street. There's no aggregate loss due to it being a asphalt road. You don't have that same type of problem you have with chip seal. And there's cracking, alligator patches. You can see, 2 years ago, fiscal year 2012, 2013, we chip sealed this street. Crack filled this street. And where we stopped is where the crack stopped. So where that crack fill patch ends, the cracking you then see past it has occurred since 2013, 2014 fiscal year. So it's just a process you got to keep going up with, and up and down that section of Scenic Loop there's cracking. So what you have, this is Antonio Drive. It's a sunk spot there that we took a picture of. That's the mill and overlay area that we recommend for that street. We could also just do a chip seal patch there, which we've patched that particular pothole, since I've been here. I've been working here a little over 4 years now. We've patched that same pothole 3 different times, so seems like once a year we're having to go in there and patch it. So the reason why I recommended the mill and overlay that little section is so we can get it lifted. Something's wrong in the subgrade under the chip seal, which is what's causing that to fail. Surface treatment won't get to that. We'll have to get it all out there and come back new. And then we already this past year crack filled that entire strip. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go down it. We did an extensive amount of crack filling there. So we're just recommending that small mill and overlay patch, and then seal coat on the chip seal sections of that road. There is some asphalt down further. We would not seal coat, but the chip seal section, we would want to do that to prevent any further aggregate loss off that street.
And again, this is when, something like asphalt zipper would come in handy, because it would be hard to get a contractor to come out and do a small section, whereas we could just go in there and do it ourselves. Yeah, Bert?
Excuse me, Josh,
Yes, sir.
when, like on Antonio, I saw we have the stripes, and the mill and overlay would mess that up. I mean, this machine doesn't stripe the.
No, sir, that would be an
We'd-
additional cost.
We'd
Yes,
have to, contract that out, right?
yes, sir.
All right.
And I guess, the question was, I guess we can do small sections and large streets with this machine?
Yes.
Just depending on the size of the machine you get will depend the number of square footage you can mill at one time, which smaller, you can do less, bigger, you can do more, so.
But if,
Yeah. They did have an estimate of what you could do in a day. I don't remember what it was, so if you do, please share.
Essentially mill, an entire street within a day.
Right.
However, that doesn't include the overlay itself, so you have to come in the following day or the same day, preferably, and overlay at the same time. You're milling up the hill, you'll be overlaying the down part of the hill.
And one of the pros with the milling and overlay is you can stabilize it almost as soon as you mill it. If you're able to have the process down where you have a milled section, a stabilized section, and then an asphalt section already going in behind it, we have minimal disruption. And the benefit with it is that street can be open that night, even if you do not have the asphalt down. Once the mill is stabilized, you can open it to traffic. All you'll have is a 2-inch bump or a 1-inch bump, depending on the asphalt thickness, wherever you stop. And the street can be open for traffic that evening, so it's not a big process where we have to close everything down.
And just for clarity, we would not be doing the overlay. We would just be doing the milling
Yes.
if we did it ourselves.
Yes, sir. Bar X Trail, the reason we recommended 2 options for this street, because as you can see from this picture, there's extreme cracking. To crack fill this street and then seal coat the upper sections where the asphalt stopped would be expensive for a crack fill system, because of the large amount of crack fills you're gonna be using. Basically, that picture, that area is probably about 40% of the roadway going up to the top. So more than, close to half of your street looks exactly like that. What you would have to do is it's impossible to crack fill every crack there. So that would be something where you would just take the material, lay it across the top, and spread it over it. So I gave 2 options, because when you have to do that type of crack fill, it raises the cost of crack fill up tremendously. So we gave the one option of crack fill and seal coating in the areas that needed it, and then also the mill and overlay option, which would be basically milling that whole area, the whole street, and coming out on the new surface. This street was overlaid. There's a street underneath this street, and I've never bid into it to tell if it's an asphalt or chip seal street. I would only guess it's chip sealed under asphalt, because everything else there is chip sealed, but I don't know for sure. And that could be contributing to the large amount of cracking on this particular road. Marion Hollow, we're just recommending a seal coat due to aggregate loss. If you see the outside radius there, some of that radius is edge of road repair that we've done, but the picture doesn't really show how much of that aggregate on the side is actually loose aggregate. You could go up there and build you a little pile of it pretty easily. And what it is aggregate coming off the road. You can see the white looking rock on the asphalt, on the chip seal street, excuse me. And it's right on a corner, so it's kind of all just pushing off to the side. And this street was recently crack filled, actually this year, fiscal year 2014, 2015. So that's why we just recommended the one processed.
Yes. Bert?
I'm sorry, I know this is the end of our streets, but what's Evans Valley look like?
Yeah, we can go look at Evans Valley. We actually just crack filled the entire Evans Valley subdivision this year. You'll probably see some of that on there. We're really just recommending a seal coat on this street. It's actually holding together real well. Very good ride quality, very few divots in this street. So it's crack filled and it's ready for seal coat. But as you can see in the picture, where the lanes of traffic are, where that color changes from black to a lighter white color, that's loss of oil. There's no aggregate there, so it's a good candidate for the seal coat option.
Any other questions? Good job, Josh.
Thank you, sir.
And I'd like to compliment Rick and Josh and the crew for going out and doing all the picture taking and putting this together.
Okay. Continuing on, so I think the problem that we're having here internally from a budgeting perspective is there's conflicting goals here, right? So people want to have good roads, but they don't want their property taxes to increase. And so I think for a long time we've had a heavy emphasis on making sure property taxes are either lowered or at a reasonable or stable rate. And there's nothing wrong with that. So what we went to from a staff level is, okay, if council wants to keep property tax rates stable, are there other types of revenue raisers, if you will, that we can look at and present to city council? And that's what we're doing here tonight. The issue from a citizen perspective is that they expect expediency in road repairs. I can tell you when they call Josh to have a pothole fixed, they expect it to be fixed that day. And they're pretty good. I won't say it happens that day, but within that week, it tends to get completed. But they are concerned about government excess, unnecessary equipment, and rising personnel costs in the sense that how many people do you actually need in a public works department? You keep hiring year over year, year over year. So what we're looking at here are ways that we can bring in additional revenue and possibly contract out, if that's the will of council, with an independent contractor to do the mill and overlay, if you will, or to do the seal coats. And the other hurdle that we have is internally with employees. Basically, when you look at the general fund, everybody wants a piece of the general fund and they want more and more and more. And typically you'll hear from departments, well, it's a public health or safety issue. Well, roads, in our opinion, are a public health and safety issue. You can't get a police vehicle, a fire vehicle, an EMS vehicle to a place if it doesn't have a good road to go on. So we believe that this is a public health and safety issue as well. And revenues oftentimes lag needs. And what I mean by that is you saw in many of the streets, we have a definite need for road repair throughout the city, but our revenues, albeit they are increasing, both from a property tax and a sales tax perspective, they're not increasing fast enough to help us under our current funding mechanisms or level to address those road repairs. And I would not recommend at this point to shuffling the current distribution of funds that we have to the various departments in order to have more money for public works. I think every department operates honestly pretty lean. And so from that perspective, I'm looking at, again, what additional revenue raisers can we look at that are attractive to us. What we're looking at here is the street maintenance sales tax, as we've been talking about. Now, there are four main criteria you look at when you're implementing a new tax. Number one, you have to look at, is that tax efficient? And what I mean by that is, does that tax distort consumer behavior? Okay? If it does, it could distort it positively or negatively, but most of the time when you implement a tax, it distorts it negatively. Meaning people react in an opposite manner because they don't want to pay that tax. So you have to look at it from an efficient standpoint. You have to look at it from an equitable standpoint in the sense is the tax fair? is it being, the most fair tax you can have is something akin to a user fee. If you use it, you actually pay for it. Okay, that is from a theoretical standpoint the most equitable. From an adequate standpoint, you have to ask the question, does it raise sufficient tax revenues to do the job that it is intended to do? Okay, and lastly, you have to ask, is it feasible? And what I mean by that is there a mechanism already in place for you actually to adopt that tax? Well, under our current system of government, we're a general law municipality. We can only do what state law allows us to do. Okay, and so you have to look at whether state law already allows that type of tax to be implemented. So I want to go through each one of these quickly. Under efficiency, and again, how does that tax distort behavior? The biggest competitor that we have is going to be the city of San Antonio. Okay, most people in Helotes, they shop in Helotes, but most of the time they likely go into the city of San Antonio to shop. So you have to look at what their sales tax rate is to what the tax rate that we're proposing tonight that we go up to, and see how they compare. As you can see, city of San Antonio is currently at 8.25%. We're currently at 7.75%. So theoretically, people should be wanting to shop more in Helotes because they're paying less sales tax. The issue, of course, that we have is we're a smaller community. We don't have a large variety of retail as San Antonio does. So in reality, because of that factor, people still go into San Antonio to shop. But theoretically, they should be shopping in Helotes because it's cheaper. After the tax implementation, if assuming, because we're going to recommend tonight that y'all adopt an ordinance calling for a 0.25%. We would be currently at 8.25, or excuse me, San Antonio would be at 8.25, and we would then go up to 8%. Again, you had the same situation where we're still cheaper than San Antonio, so we shouldn't have a loss of efficiency in the tax. Okay. The other concern, the negative side of this, you could say we're going from 7.75% up to 8%. So theoretically, again, we should be, because we're going up in tax, people should be less likely to want to purchase things in Helotes because our goods are getting more expensive. The issue, that's a moot issue, however, because again, San Antonio, our biggest competitor, is higher still than us. The next thing you have to look at is the tax fare. What we are proposing here is the equitability of the tax is extremely fair because we believe it's a user fee. People who are using our roads are purchasing goods within our city, and therefore that portion of the sales tax dedicated to street maintenance is going into a fund to fund repair and maintenance of streets that they are using. So we believe that it is an equitable or a fair tax. The next thing you have to look at is, does the tax raise sufficient revenues? Well, based on 2014 sales tax figures, a 0.25% street maintenance sales tax would generate approximately $270,000 a year, versus the $69,000 or the $70,000 that we currently are appropriating for street and drainage. So when you look at it compared to the 27 years, that drops the amount of work that we can do on a rotating basis to 7 years from 27 years. Because $270,000 a year, it'll take 7 years to get to approximately $1.87 million, which is significantly lower than the 27 years that we're talking about. So we believe that this is a tax that it would generate a sufficient amount of revenue in the city of Helotes for us to maintain roads significantly better than we are currently maintaining the roadways. Okay, the next thing you have to look at, or the last thing you have to look at, is can the tax be implemented? Well, Tax Code Title III, Subtitle C, Chapter 327 of the Tax Code actually has a chapter for municipal sales and use tax for street maintenance that a general law municipality can implement. You can do it in 1/8% or 1/4%. We're recommending tonight the 1/4%. It does require an election, and it requires reauthorization every 4 years. Somebody asked me, they heard that this actually went up to every 10 years. We would have to be through the decennial census up to 10,000 population which we likely will be before the next census occurs. But up until that point happens, we would have to reauthorize this tax every 4 years. And the good thing about this is it's administered by the state comptroller in the exact same manner that our current sales tax collections are administered. So there would be no additional administrative functions from a staff perspective or a city perspective, because we would be getting that remittance like we currently do, and all that we would have to do is divide that accordingly based upon the percentages. And we already do that based upon what we get for the city and what we get for the EDC. So it's a minor added step. The next question that you have to look at, and this is coming in consultation with the city attorney, is what can we use these monies for? These monies cannot be used to build a new road. They can only be used to maintain existing roads within the city of Helotes, which frankly we're okay with, because that's where our issue lies. Not in the new roads that we have, but in the older roads, as the mayor said, 30, 40-year-old roads. As long as it's within the right-of-way, these are the things that we have uncovered that we can use the tax for, and again, this has been vetted through the city attorney. We can use it for pavement and curbing, drainage structures and maintenance, as long as those structures are within the right-of-way and integral to the road. Okay, bridges, striping, bollards, guardrails, and lane indicators. Those are the things that we can use. Now, most of the stuff that we've been talking about tonight fits in category number 1. And that's where most of the dollars are actually going to go to on an annual basis. The other things, drainage is a chunk of money, but that's really sort of the maintenance and the mowing. The other things we spend significantly less dollars than we do on the pavement itself. So tonight what we're asking from this body is general direction that you would like to adopt an ordinance calling for an election in November, not in a city council a May election where council members or the mayor are called, but in November of 2015, at a 1/4%. Which would, again, generate that $270,000. The November election, in talking with the city secretary, would estimate it to cost about $8,000. What's great about this is that we didn't have an election this year, so we can utilize those funds to a November election and actually still be in the black, because we estimated more than $8,000 for the election. Subsequent, assuming council is okay with this, you would have to call an election by August 24th, 2015. Election day would be November 3rd, 2015, and if it passes, the tax would go into effect April 1st of 2016. So there is some delay in when you actually, voters approve it or disapprove it, and when it goes into effect. What we are looking at subsequent, assuming that the passage of the sales tax occurs, in May of 2016 is when we would prefer to have a comprehensive pavement condition index drafted. And what that means, and our preference would be to use a company called, well, there's two options. We could either use our city engineer, which does something very similar to what the Public Works Department did internally, okay, which is basically going to a place and taking photographs and doing site visits. Our preference would be to go with a company called Cartograph. Cartograph would come out with GPS units and essentially X-ray units or something. I don't know what the technology is, but they would drive every street and they would pick up every public works infrastructure within that right-of-way. Signage, sidewalks, curbing. It would look at the condition of the index by surveying it underneath the vehicle that's going over it, and all the signage again. So it basically looks at the entire width of the right-of-way and everything that is within that right-of-way. That would be our preference. That's not cheap. We're still waiting on bids from that company, but it's several tens of thousands of dollars in order for them to do that. And whether we could use these monies for the initial process, if you will, to make sure that we have a good PCI for all of our streets, that is something that I have not yet determined as to whether we can do that. And that's our presentation. Are there any questions for either myself or the public, or Josh Mayer?
I'd like to make just a couple of statements, and then you guys can follow up. Just for information purposes, one thing that I don't believe Rick mentioned, but to keep in mind that this would then free up the money that we are taking out of the general fund for street maintenance now, which is generally between 50 and 75,000, maybe a little more. This would replace that, so that would be money that we would be able to use for other things. Also, in last month's meeting that I attended with the Greater Bear County Council of Cities, I brought this up to the other mayors that were in attendance, and they were all very positive. There are a lot of suburban cities in Bear County that have this tax and use it for street maintenance, and they had no problem getting it passed in the election. In fact, Mayor Riley from Leon Valley said that in Texas, every city that's ever proposed this to the electorate in that city, it's passed. There's never been one that has failed. Of course, there could always be a first. But people realize that street maintenance is expensive, and as a result, they're usually supportive of this if they know, and it's very clear that that money is going to be used strictly for streets and then eventually drainage. And also, the reason we had talked about November and encouraged council to consider November is simply because it would allow it to take effect sooner, and we would be receiving that sales tax rather than waiting until May. It would be toward the end of the year. So anyway, that being said, let's see, you were first last time. Ed, you want to follow up with any questions?
I don't have too many questions, I just, a little observation. I know in the presentation you talked about a 7-year time frame versus a 27-year investment. I can't help to think that scenario could get even better if we were to invest or do the analysis to see if we can purchase the equipment, do it in-house using our personnel, and those savings, go a lot further, because at 270, according to the calculations there, at 1/4% interest, 1/4% tax, could go a lot further. And just as Mayor said, the money's budgeted already for street maintenance can be used elsewhere in the, for the general fund. So I think it's a great move and a wise investment on behalf of the citizens, because the street maintenance is imperative for the safety, and it may reduce some accidents perhaps, when things are all said and done, but it's a must. It's something that we have to do, continually invest in our city, So I'm hopeful we can come up with some kind of analysis to see what it would be, what the cost would be if we were to purchase the equipment and use personnel and even add another additional personnel. I can't help but think it'd be cheaper overall.
We will already have that information, or at least we have pieces of that information that we can put together, and we will send that out to council
Sounds good.
next week.
Sounds good, thanks.
Alex?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was, the first question I had seems to have been implied a lot, but I presume that the funds would be able to be used to purchase equipment, not just for labor and materials for purchase of capital equipment, which is what this would be, right? So we could use that for this purchase of the zipper item,
It's
and or possibly a bigger
I don't think we have.
loading equipment, or?
I do not have that information for you tonight. My initial impression is no. I don't believe that you can use it, because I think it has to be used on existing streets and maintenance on existing streets. However, again, we can talk to our city attorney and get an opinion from him on whether it can also be used for equipment.
In reading, my guess would also be that it's not. However, the attorney's still looking at other questions that we have, and so we'll address that.
No, and I was curious about that, because a lot of the conversation seemed to imply that maybe it would be possible to do that as a part of saving costs somewhere else, but as you indicated, it would free up monies from the other maintenance that we spend, and which of course could then go towards the purchase of of the equipment necessary to continue to see the bigger savings, you know, maybe a bigger piece of equipment that can go faster, and then if we get it all done, then we could maybe rent it to other cities and make some more money.
Hey, it's been done.
Oh, I imagine. The other question I had was why in November? I guess it's too late to do it now.
Yeah.
But, and then the follow-up on that one would be if we did it in November and then the reallocation, is that also done by another election, or does it just have to be approved at the council level?
The reauthorization has to be,
As
you
a-
have to
as
have an
a
election
subsequent election,
every
okay.
4 years, yes.
Yeah, that was my second, and that was right along with the November part, because then that forces us to a second election 4 years later, as opposed to being able to incorporate it along with if we already had an election
So you,
sometime.
you could then probably shift it to May, that shouldn't be a problem.
You'd have to
We're
accelerate
just
it
wanting to
6
kick it
months.
off,
Yeah,
now.
okay.
And the other cities that were at the meeting last month, they all said that every 4 years they have to go through that election process.
Yeah, the key is you have to make sure that election occurs obviously before the tax expires.
Right.
So as long as, if it's in May or in November, as long as it hasn't expired yet, it doesn't,
Yeah, you can do
essentially
it
doesn't
in-
matter.
In May of the 4th year, rather than wait till November.
Okay, good. That's all I had. Thank you.
Bert?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank Dustin and Justin, and especially Joshua Mayer for doing all this work. Josh has been talking about this now for quite a while now, and I really applaud you for coming up with this idea. It's very well thought out of, good presentation. And I think spending $8,000 on an election to possibly get $270,000 of revenue is a no-brainer. My only suggestion would be to possibly do maybe 1 or 2 workshops to inform our citizens what this quarter-cent sales tax would do and how much it would help our city. I know the mayor has said that I don't think there's been a city that has turned this down, but I still think we might want to do a workshop or 2 to inform our citizens. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Streets are certainly an essential function of the city government, and I think they give you a good sense of the quality of the city, so we do need to improve our streets. I guess the question I have is, after 7 years, this tax gets reauthorized, all the streets are repaired, then what are we gonna do? We're gonna start using some striping? I know we're gonna do some drainage with it. I mean, what happens after that? Everything's repaired, we're in good shape, now what?
Well, I think to adequately answer that question, I'm going to defer to Josh, but I think what his argument would be is that you should assume that streets are never completely repaired. Because in the 7th year, when you are completing 1/2 of the city or a portion of the city, those things that you did in year 1 and year 2 are already needing some sort of maintenance, whether it be seal coating or crack fill or what have you. So I think from Public Works' argument is they would say that the job is never done. Is there anything else?
Well,
Can you stand up, please?
There's a manual put out by the Texas Department of Transportation, specifically in regards to the type of work that we're planning on doing in the streets, surface repair, simple crack fill, and the standard that they try to go on. Of course, there's always the verbiage, if it's affordable, right, if you can afford to do it, but the standard is a 6 to 8 year rotation. So if you crack fill something, the ultimate goal is within 6 to 8 years of that time, you're back crack filling it again to continue that. So you don't lose what you caught up when you did it the first time.
Okay.
well, and also remembering the street study that LNV did, I believe it was in '07, and they took streets and graded the streets on quality. And the statement they had in there was about every 7 years, maybe 10, you need to go back and readdress those streets. So, as Josh says, it would be just an ongoing process. The benefit of this is that we would bring all of our streets up to grade A quality, I guess, and then be able to maintain that to where they wouldn't get to where they're alligatoring and crack filling as much as they're necessary now.
And to answer you know, it's council's prerogative as to whether it wishes to issue an ordinance to reauthorize the tax. So if a future council or this same council feels that that tax is no longer needed, you simply do not reauthorize it and it goes away.
That's a good
Thank you.
point. Any follow-up, Ed, Alex, Bert?
Yeah, just like to address what Councilmember Frederick said. We are in process of annexing a lot more streets too, so I think we will be using that money down the road, so.
Yeah, I would think even though Braun and Gulm and Shanefield are relatively new streets, thanks to Bear County, with the volume of traffic that those streets get, it will be in that 5 to 8 year period before we'll start having to really do some maintenance there also. So, yeah, that's a good point. Anything else?
No,
From
sir.
anybody? Okay, then we will proceed with that and bring it back to you for action, probably within the next month or so. Okay, that takes us to item 17, discussion and action on a proposal regarding the consolidation of fire and emergency services with ESD 7. So we'll entertain a motion and a second.
Mayor, make a motion that we discuss and take action on item 17 as written.
Okay, we have a motion from Fredericks. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Bynes. And Rick, if you would, just give them a quick overview of this and why we're proposing it. And then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, sir. So, as all of council knows, we currently have a contract that renews annually with ESD number 7, and consequently with District 7 Fire and Rescue. Essentially what you have is ESD number 7 is the governmental entity that collects the tax, and then they, through, I assume, an interlocal agreement, actually District 7 utilizes that revenue and has, or that tax, and has personnel and has the equipment and all of those sorts of things to operate fire and EMS. The greatest issue I think that we're having here, and the reason that we're proposing that council allow us to start the conversation with ESD 7 on consolidation or absorption or whatever you want to call it, is that the city of Helotes continues to expand into ESD territory. So you have firefighters and you have EMS that are responding in one area, and we can be responding in another area that doesn't necessarily make sense for the citizen. A good example would be Gulm Road. We own, now it's in our corporate city limits, Gulm Road. But if an accident were to occur in front of ESD 7's number 1 station or first station, technically we would be the responding authority, and so we would drive out to that, even though that accident occurred right in front of their building. So from a citizen perspective or a public health and safety perspective, it doesn't make sense as the city of Helotes, which has the ability to continue to expand into ESD territory. It makes sense now for us to start talking about, is it possible for us to combine resources with ESD 7 so that we can have adequate personnel, adequate geographic locations for stations. And the great thing about ESD is they already have stations geographically located that would help us, and of course us responding would help them. So there are a lot of these issues that are coming on. Essentially what we're looking at is we believe that the fundamental reason that we are proposing this tonight, and I've included it in the agenda item request form, and we've included it in the memorandum that hopefully y'all will authorize us to send tomorrow, is an economies of scale issue and the ability to respond to citizens out in not only the city of Helotes, but in ESD territory in a better manner than we currently are doing so. The 4 areas that we're currently contracted with, for example, are Stanton Run, Elm Hollow, Adobe Ranch, and Helotes,
Ranch Acres.
thank you, Helotes Ranch Acres Unit 6. All of those locations are closer to our fire station than they are to ESD 7. So if ESD 7 was to say tomorrow, we no longer want to have an agreement with you, and you be the first responder, they would be coming through our city to respond to those citizens' concerns. That doesn't make sense. So what we are looking at here is to initiate conversations on a consolidation. We don't have a clue whether that board of directors wants to consolidate or will just simply poo-poo the idea tomorrow. We do not know, but we felt that this was a significant enough of an issue that we did not feel comfortable from a staff perspective initiating that conversation without council approval or, essentially council approval of us starting that process. Chief Daughtry is here today, and of course, operationally, he can answer those questions a lot more effectively than I can. So if there are operational questions, he can address those. Are there any questions based upon what we've presented in packet or what we've talked about thus far?
Chief, if you want to come on up, just in case there's any questions that Rick can't handle. Paul, we'll start with you this time.
I guess my question is, ideally, we're proposing taking over their stations and utilizing those as a city base for emergency services out of the ESD 7 stations,
And their personnel.
and we'll absorb their personnel.
Yes.
And we'll be getting their tax revenue.
What we would be looking at here is an interlocal agreement. Any governmental entity can actually enter into an interlocal agreement to contract with another governmental entity to do what it is that that governmental entity could do if it wanted to. And I know that sounds convoluted, but essentially we both provide fire and EMS services, so they can contract with us and they can use their tax revenue to come to us to pay for the consolidation, to pay for the personnel, to pay for the equipment, to pay for maintenance, so on and so forth. The city of Helotes is an entity that does not have an expiration date. An ESD, by state law, by its nature, should have an expiration date because municipalities grow into them. And therefore, there is no need for that temporary gap of service out in the rural county areas because the cities are continuing to expand through annexation. Certain members of the ESD may not agree with that, but that's a fact. And so we are taking the approach that we believe that it is time to enter into a true conversation about what the future of the city is and what the future of the ESD is, recognizing the fact that we are an entity that will stay in place and that the ESD most likely will continue to erode, if you will, from other cities annexing. And that, recognizing that fact and truly coming together and to consolidate, as long as it makes financial sense for the city of Helotes. I mean, we don't know all the ins and outs of this yet. We believe it's better for both organizations in the long run, and most importantly, better for the citizens that are out there in areas further away from our fire station or from their fire stations.
I get, the only other question I have is, and I assume there's a lot of overlap between us and ESD 7, but I assume they go in other areas that are not in our city limits. I guess what would happen at that point in time? Who would service those guys? And I guess that's the question, or that's an argument for ESD 7. Who would service those areas that we wouldn't be able to accommodate at consolidation?
Theoretically speaking, I think that,
Yes.
Yeah.
theoretically speaking, if that were to occur, if there was some form of consolidation, you're absolutely right. All of the ETJ of Helotes is in ESD currently. There's also the rest of the ESD area is in San Antonio's ETJ. So the area you're speaking of would be San Antonio's ETJ that's within the corporate, or not the corporate, but within the boundaries of the Emergency Services District number 7. I can't answer your question other than say that the approach that I would think that they would take, being the commissioners that are responsible for those tax dollars to those people, would be if there was some form of consolidation, part of that agreement would be we need to maintain coverage to that area until San Antonio annexes. At that time, then that area would become San Antonio's responsibility rather than the Emergency Services District.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify something here. What we would be proposing is that ESD would contract with us, since we're absorbing their personnel and their equipment, that we would cover their entire territory through that interlocal
Yeah,
agreement,
and
which is why having the different stations that they currently have, or the land that they have, is integral to this concept as well. I would say, I mean, I think you would agree, they've done a good job of planning for future growth in their areas. And so we would be taking on those facilities and their personnel and manning them accordingly wherever they needed to be manned at.
Using their personnel and their equipment, our folks would still stay in the city like they are now.
And they would become employees of the city of Pelotas? Or would they be contracted?
No, they would become,
Employees.
most likely they would become employees of the city of Pelotas under one chief and Chief Daughtry, and under his current management structure.
And keep in mind, we're just making some assumptions here.
Yeah,
because,
all of these are assumptions.
We haven't even started a dialogue, and they may not wanna start a dialogue, so this is just to enable us by sending them a letter to enter into conversation if they want to.
I think the last thing that we wanted to do is go to them and propose something of this nature, and they are amenable to it, and to come back to this body and say, we're not interested in doing that. We're asking for your permission to start this dialogue.
Right.
Thank you.
Ed?
I think it's a great idea. You know, we wanna utilize our resources efficiently, and I'm sure the county is interested in doing just the same. So I think, you know, getting the dialogue started is important. I guess I'm concerned hearing what you just said about absorbing those employees, them becoming employees, because it comes with a cost. You know, I mean, if we're gonna do full-blown employment, we're talking about retirement and health benefits, all that good stuff, which I'm sure those guys might welcome, you know, but it is a considerable, you know, cost factor. So I'm hopeful, you know, you get back to us and figure out more or less where the numbers lie within that type of agreement arrangement, but it makes sense.
Anything else? Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my first question was in the line, the same way Councilman Fredericks said, and that is that the question about the area they cover that isn't even in our ETJ, or maybe even even envisioned to be close enough that we might be able to respond, because I know when ESD 7 was created, it took multiple votes of the citizens of those areas to agree to the tax and to create that, which of course happened after Helotes took over the fire department that covered them before. And so I would wonder, how would we envision handling that? When you look at the quality of service that's provided, clearly the city of Helotes has a much higher quality of fire protection than maybe ESD number 7 does, going way out past 211 and areas like that. I don't even know where their territory lies. I mean, if it goes all the way to the county line, that's huge. And then we have to wonder, especially you were presenting all of the work you've been working on the brush fire potential situation, and now all of a sudden we have huge areas of inaccessible hill country that we might very well incorporate to our responsibility that could tax our ability to maintain things here. So I worry about what happens to that, and thinking that San Antonio is gonna annex out there in the next 10 years, I think is optimistic. I don't think they're going to. So that was one thought. The cost associated with absorbing that many new employees, I think would have a terrific impact on our budget, which we'd have to look at. Certainly, there's a lot more cost that we put into an employee than maybe they do into a firefighter. You know, everything from the pension costs that we've been talking about, the additional costs for health insurance benefits that we provide, and not to mention that if they are our employees, then we would have to then provide the full level of training and everything else that we want to make sure that our city employees have. The other question I have, and I don't know, I'm not against it. I'm completely in favor of the discussion, but until the discussion comes back, I am not sure I can make a statement that says I'm in favor of consolidation. The third one is that when somebody calls 911 and there's an emergency, the police and the fire show up together. If we consolidate with that and we send our fire and EMS out there, are they now relying on our police, or are we gonna have to wait for a different entity to altogether, from the sheriff or the constable to come out there? And how is that coordination gonna work, and will that also require another interlocal agreement? And that seems to get, it's a different topic, but it's still part of the whole issue of when they call, who shows up. Because it's usually both in
Yeah.
some of those instances.
Well, it's both in the city of Helotes for the most part. I don't know in the county if the sheriff shows up. He
That
does?
would be Bear County Sheriff.
And he does
All
show up?
that would
Okay.
function the same, the way I see it.
I mean, all of the questions that you're asking are very good questions,
questions.
and we don't have answers for you yet. We don't envision this to be a short process or a short negotiation with them, if it even gets off the ground. So your points are taken, they're valid, and we will certainly, if they're interested in this concept, we will have to address those with them in that meeting.
And we're certainly not going to pursue something that's gonna create a negative cash flow to the city. It would have to be, the revenues being generated that we would be getting paid for would have to far offset the benefits and everything else. I don't see it really changing the way their area is covered or us. It's just, it's gonna prevent them from having to pay us for 4 areas and then us saying, well, can you handle this? And they'll say, well, we'll swap this for that. And it's just getting very complicated.
Which is the way it's
trying to work
currently
with
working.
them.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Right, cause we're talking, okay, something happens on Gulham Road, like Rick said, does it make more sense for them to handle, an emergency out there rather than us travel that far and go out, to that area when they're right there? These are the things that we're talking about that has brought us to this point. So again, this is just step one of a long process.
And the annexation that just took place tonight,
Yes.
that eventually will be 550 homes, that's right next to their station.
Right.
That's another thing that I think is really spurring this discussion at this point.
So this will be, well, do we even swap? We take care of their 4 areas and they take care of that, and there's no dollars exchanged? So these are the discussions we see coming, and we're just trying to take it to somewhere where hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, I think part of my concern was not the much that's the stuff that's close, because we're close, we've got a really good handle on what we respond to, and we're very proud of the response rate. But when we consolidate and assume responsibility for 10, 15 miles out, then I think we have to question what that does for the service of those who are close. You know, when our EMS units are out at some major accident on 211 down there, you know, near where it intersects 471, because maybe that's in their area, because it's not in San Antonio. Then what happens when there's another accident here, and we're 15 miles off? I think that's one thing we have to, because their territory is huge, and it's, a lot of it's not easily accessible, and that's my concern, is that would we be, certainly for everything local, yeah, no question about it. The interlocal agreement takes care of that, even though it's complicated, but you consolidate, you do a lot of other things that are uneasy
Sure, and
to correct.
I would never see us jeopardizing city services by going out there. They now transport, they have 2 EMS units. They're backed up, I believe, by Acadian still, is that right, for transport? I don't see us running our EMS, I don't believe we would negotiate to where our EMS units would go out there. They'd still have to.
Well,
handle that area.
remember though, that we're talking about, the concept here is consolidation.
Yeah.
So these personnel, we are assuming, perhaps incorrectly at this point, but we are assuming that they have adequate staffing levels and that they have adequate equipment stationed at the variety of stations that they currently have. So I would assume that, I'm just assuming, but I would assume that they are within an appropriate response rate or response time now currently. And we're talking about bringing all of their equipment and all of their personnel on board with us. So I think it's an issue, but I don't necessarily envision that being a huge issue because they should already be appropriately staffed and equipped.
I think that's a very good point, that we maybe fail to understand that if this were to happen, we're bringing those resources in. It's not doing that with our current resources. We're adding the resources that they have, and they're adequately protecting their area. They, I believe, May 1st, their entire district for ISO will be a 3, which April 1, we became 3 throughout the city. We lost that 8B / which people that are further than 1,000 feet from the hydrant still have that 3 rather than the 8B that they did. Their entire district is becoming a 3, I believe, May 1. So that's some indication that they're adequately protecting that area as well.
And that their equipment is comparable to ours, because that's a big part of that grading system.
Yes, sir. Their equipment comparable to ours, in some cases much newer than some of our equipment. Their staffing, they're required by state law to have certified firefighters and paramedics for their ambulance and obviously for the fire truck. So they meet the same standards, state standards that our personnel do. One of the other things that I would mention in the sense of financially speaking here is that they have a tax rate of just shy of 10 cents. 10 cents is the maximum by state law that ESDs are allowed to tax. But keep in mind that full 10 cents goes for fire EMS protection. Whereas our tax rate, all the other city services are included in that. 10 cents fully for fire, and they've added EMS.
Okay, anything else?
Bert?
Thank you. Chief, from what I'm hearing, you are fully supporting this consolidation, is that correct?
I think there's a lot of unanswered questions,
Right.
Councilman. I'm in favor of starting the dialogue.
Okay.
You know, as the city administrator said, this is not going to be an easy, short-term fix. They may not even want to consider this. But again, the last thing we wanted to do is to approach them, and they're amenable to that. And we come back, and this body is not amenable to that.
So
concept.
this is totally, on their part, gonna be a board decision on their part,
Yes.
okay? I think we met with them, or some of them, a while back.
Yeah, and I'll be frank, the reason that we're also going through this is we want their decision to be a board decision. So we feel that this is a formal enough process that it behooves them as a board to make a board decision rather than have information transfer from chief to chief or from
Right.
one board member to the chief. We want a collective decision on their end as to which way they want to go forward. And we have not received at this point a good indication as to which way they want to go forward from the board itself. It's always been secondhand conversations that have occurred, and so we believe that this is an important step in figuring out what our role and their role will be going forward.
A couple more questions. Do they have a ladder truck?
No, sir, they do not.
They do not have a ladder truck, okay. And then, are they using Bear County right now for dispatch?
They are, yes, sir.
So if we did if this would work out, I guess what would we do, bring them on board with us?
Say again?
Okay, they're using Bear County for dispatch right now, is that correct?
Yeah.
So what, I mean, we'd have to think about,
They would be
whether
our
we-
personnel and they would be through our dispatch.
Through our dispatch, right?
okay, that's what we would offer them?
That's
Yes.
what we would do.
That's what we would do?
We would have, well, we would,
Yeah.
yes, we would have to. It would be too complicated to have, I would think, one dispatch center
Okay.
dispatching a certain number of city employees and another dispatch center
Right.
dispatching others.
No, we would bring them under ours.
Okay. It's gonna be complicated, but it needs to be done. There's no doubt.
Well, and as we're saying, this is just getting your approval to start this process by sending this letter. And we would in no way do anything that would be detrimental, as I said before, for the city. And it's gonna have to be a win-win ultimately for ESD 7. They're gonna have to see it as a win. We're gonna have to see it as a win for this thing to work. And so, hopefully they'll at least come talk, but there's no guarantees. They may just file 13 our letter, who knows? But we'll see. Okay, anything
done.
else? Follow-up?
You had mentioned that ESD seven has a tax of 10 cents on the property tax.
Just shy of 10 cents.
And would we get to absorb that in some form or fashion?
That would be included in the interlocal agreement that in order to fund ESD operations and personnel and equipment, that money, currently what's happening is that money essentially is being transferred through an interlocal agreement from ESD seven to District seven Fire and Rescue. I don't know about all of it, but a majority of it certainly is. And so it would be the same type of arrangement that if we're taking on the risk of essentially absorbing them, all of that money through an interlocal agreement would have to come to the city of Helotes to continue funding those same operations.
But ESD seven expires at some point in time?
Well, I think what Rick was, go ahead,
They
through annexation, right?
They don't expire. What I'm saying is that it is my opinion that state law created ESD 7s to fill a gap. And that was the gap between outer rural areas that didn't have access to fire protection and areas closer or within, for example, the city of Helotes or city of San Antonio that obviously do have fire protection. There was nothing in the unincorporated part of the county to put out fires. So they created ESD to generate a tax to create a professional firefighter organization. But as other cities expand through annexation, they eventually go away. And I don't mean to be rude by this, but they should go away because there's no reason for that organization to exist anymore because a city has expanded and is taking care of those services.
Well,
Eventually, all of their area is either gonna be city of Helotes or city of San Antonio.
Well, but some of that's gonna be way out in the future. However, it's gonna get to a point where they can't generate enough revenue to service the area and maintain their quality of service. Much as what happened when we were a volunteer fire department back in the 80s in Bear County Company 4, which was over in the Calabre area and over by John Marshall High School. They had 3 or 4 stations. They were the largest volunteer fire department in Bear County, and through annexation by the city of San Antonio, eventually they just disappeared. So the same thing's probably gonna happen to ESD that's near a urban area. They're just gonna be losing so much of their area that it won't be economically feasible for them. Fair statement?
Yes, sir.
Ed, any follow-up? Alex?
No, sir.
Bert? Okay, then the action part of this, agenda item is to authorize us to go ahead and sign this letter and send it off to ESD 7 to see if, they will respond in some kind of positive fashion to at least, begin a dialogue. So we have a motion and a second to, take action. No further discussion. We'll call the question. All in favor of approving the, initiation of, this process, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. And we thank you for, that, and we will get that underway. And, that happens to be the last item on our agenda. So if there are no objections from council, I will adjourn the meeting. Any objections? None heard. We're adjourned at 8:54.